All right, welcome in. Late Kick is live. It is Sunday night, September 13th, the year of our Lord 2020. We are in full-blown regular season mode, and we're going to be that way from now until we crown a national champion. Knock on wood, probably the first of about 5 times we're going to do that tonight. Anyway, my advice to you is do not miss a show. We jam-pack these shows with as much information as we can get in. There's not one thing that we're going to harp on for a very long time. There's a ton of stuff that we're going to spend like 2, 3, 4 minutes on, including this intro. So subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Can't state that in strong enough terms. Got a ton of good stuff coming your way. Some will be on the show, some will never be seen on the show, but will all be seen on the channel. We have got, as I said, a lot to talk about tonight. The Big 10, we woke up this morning, various reports. We're going to get a vote today. We're going to talk about that in just a second. We're going to get you the very latest there. I know a lot of you have been watching NFL today. A lot of you have been actually out living your lives, unless you've been in Nashville, where we got like half a year's worth of rain today. Training effect, fascinating atmospheric science phenomena we're not going to talk about tonight. But the Big 12, nightmarish Saturday. Don't necessarily know that all hope is lost for the conference, but we're going to discuss that. Georgia Tech, this has given us a perfect reason to pull the first piece of archived footage since I've been at 24/7 from my independent late kick days, and we're going to show that footage. Colin's going to roll it for you a little bit later tonight. Looking forward to that. Find any excuse that we can to pull old Columbus, Georgia footage and drop it on the new version of Late Kick here. We've got intel from a number of SEC camps. There's a lot of stuff going on. If you watched Clemson play this week, you saw Brian Brzee and you saw Miles Murphy, and you probably heard, if you heard it once, you heard it 1,000 times, the color commentators inform you that these are true freshmen. My goodness, a freshman. There's probably a couple more that haven't started their seasons yet that you need to know about. We're going to tell you about them tonight. And also, let's be real, probably if several dozen of you to, who knows, maybe a couple of hundred of you are just tuned in because you're degenerate gamblers. And I'm not hating on it. I'm not judging you. I am saying that in-season mode for Sundays around here involves us handing out our early best bet for the upcoming week, and we will do that before we go off the air tonight. So with that in mind, let's dive in. We are jam-packed. The Big 10. If you were watching college football yesterday, you woke up and you breathed a sigh of relief. We made it. Not to the finish line, but to the starting line. At least we made it. Take you back to Thursday. We told you here on Thursday, the deadline is not near, the deadline is here. Something has to happen. And by deadline, I mean you got to make a decision if we're going to have October football in the Big 10. And to put an even finer point on it, the reason October is important is because I really couldn't care less if they get it started at Thanksgiving or after. And as we've seen over the past week, a number of their star players up there don't care either. In fact, Wyatt Davis already opted out for Ohio State, so we'll see how that pans out. My point is, give us October football or just don't even worry about it. And the deadline to make that decision is not approaching. The deadline is here. So then we fast forward again to yesterday morning, and you start seeing reports out of the usual places that you've been able to go to get reporting on this. And they said, hey, potential revote. And then, there's confidence building. And how many times have you heard that phrasing, by the way? And it looks like a meeting tomorrow. And here we are. Tomorrow is now today. And it's Sunday. And there are a ton of reports out there that state the meeting did happen. And drum roll, please, we have no vote. No vote, Colin. We got no vote today. So we're going to go to sleep tonight knowing really nothing more about the state of the Big Ten fall season than we did when we woke up this morning. All we know is that, again, there's that phrasing, as early as tomorrow, and cautious optimism, those are being thrown around. I guess that's better than October football ain't happening, which was also a popular sentiment being expressed by the same folks who are now suggesting this not more than maybe a couple of weeks ago. I am not assuming anything on this, and I'm going to tell you why. I think that the powers that be here have perfectly demonstrated they are incapable of doing so much as taking a leak without getting the front of their pants wet. And so I don't know why anyone feels even so much as cautious optimism here. I'm hopeful. I have cautious hope. That's what I'd say I have right now. The players, still in the dark. The coaches, still in the dark. And the coaches and players are still obviously not at the forefront of any of this. And you want to know what my evidence there is? My evidence is, when is the last time that Big Ten head coaches and Big Ten athletic directors knew something in regard to their season before the same 4 or 5 reporters did? Answer, it's been a while in the lyrics of Stained. It's been quite a while. And what that tells you is the focus here is still mainly on a couple of things. It's on PR and it's on messaging. And that really is how a politician thinks, and that's largely the kind of figures we have involved here. That's not unique to the Big Ten. What is unique to the Big Ten is how poorly they've handled this. They could still right the wrong tomorrow. They still have time. Believe it or not, we're sitting here. I mean, folks are entering week 2, week 3 of their seasons. We still have time. But any process wherein coaches and players are the last to find out well after select members of the media who have done a great job facilitating messaging from the league office in Chicago does not lead me to have the warm fuzzies. I'm hopeful just like you are, but there is, as we sit here again Sunday night, no new information other than a lot of people who have been at the forefront of reporting on this story believe as early as tomorrow we're going to have a vote. What will that vote include? What will that vote conclude? Your guess is as good as mine. Now let's talk about stuff we do know, because it actually happened on our TVs yesterday. The Big 12 had a nightmarish Saturday. You saw it, and I saw it, and everyone sitting in front of their TV saw it yesterday, and a couple of dozen of you may have been unfortunate enough to be in your home stadiums. The Big 12 Saturday, it was, you know what it looked like, because I watched Texas too, and I watched Oklahoma too. And you know my fascination with trains. It was kind of like watching a train, but on this train, there are a couple of engines, and then they're just cabooses. There's no middle. It's just a couple of engines, and they're big, and they're powerful, and they're incredible to look at, and that's Texas and Oklahoma, and we'll see about Oklahoma State. And then they're just like 20 cabooses. And that was Kansas State, and that was Iowa State. I'm a little down about Iowa State. And you know why. So I'm not even going to give you the pleasure of talking about it much, but I will say this. In summary, if you missed this yesterday, Iowa State paid not UL Lafayette, just flat out University of Louisiana. They paid the Ragin' Cajuns $350,000 to come up there and slap them around by double digits. Kansas State paid Arkansas State over $500,000 to hang an L on them. Coastal Carolina went to Kansas and got up by such a big margin in the first half, and there were so few people in the stands, the field microphones actually caught Coastal Carolina players yelling what was an absolute truth at that point, and that is, these boys can't play with us. Yeah. Back-to-back years now, Coastal has put it on Kansas. So most people watch this and they laughed, unless you're a fan of one of the aforementioned programs, and I understand that. Now, I was happy that the Big 12 was able to get their season off the ground, but I understand why a lot of you were laughing. I was watching, and I had a little bit different take on that, and what I was looking at was I was saying, this seems to be a wide-open path for two teams from this conference to make the playoff. You think that's crazy right now, only because it does sound crazy right now. I'll grant you that. It's early September. But, as I said, Texas looked great against mighty UTEP, and Oklahoma looked great against Bobby Petrino and the Missouri State Northeast Southwest whatevers they played. But I was listening to some people talk, and it was like people were so down on the Big 12 with good reason, but not the whole Big 12. Make no mistake. Now, I heard Barton Simmons refer to it as having no in-between. There is no middle ground here. It's kind of like a couple of mansions and then everything else below the poverty line. And that may be. And again, we haven't seen Oklahoma State, TCU, so we'll see about them. But right now it's Texas OU, and it's just a bunch of. And you can fill in the blank there, whatever you want to use to describe what we saw yesterday. But how could this work? How could potentially this conference sneak not one but two teams into the college football playoff? Well, I'll tell you. Think it through with me. This, I don't think, is that wild in theory. The SEC is playing 10 conference games. It is very unlikely, not impossible, but very unlikely that two teams with sparkling enough resumes are going to emerge from that conference to warrant two spots in the college football playoff. Again, I've got two SEC teams predicted to make the playoff, so I don't think it's impossible, but it's going to be really hard to do. It's going to be really hard to do. So are they going to have two resumes good enough from the SEC? Let's just say for the time being, no. I watched Clemson yesterday. I've never used the word lock in September, but they're about as close as I would ever get to referring to a team as a playoff lock in September. So let's say we got one from the SEC. Let's say we got one from the ACC. What's the G5 doing? That's the next question. And they may send somebody that looks good enough. They may not send somebody that looks good enough. But the point is, do you hear where I'm going here? We haven't filled 4 of our spots yet. And so the Big 12 needs a few things to happen. The Big 12, number one, they need a big 3. Oklahoma, Texas, they need at least one more of these teams. Theoretically, it would be Oklahoma State to really shine and to play at a top 10 caliber level, wire to wire. They need that for perception and for reasons I'm about to talk about in just a second. But also, out of this hodgepodge of mediocrity or less, and Iowa State's in here and Kansas State's in here, don't know about Baylor, don't know about TCU, but my point is, out of that whole group, they got to have at least 2 teams emerge that are considered good. Top 20, top 25-ish, I don't know how much weight top 25 carries in a year where, I don't know, maybe 2/5 of your Power 5 teams aren't out. Maybe we'll see. As I say often, our balls are in the Big Ten's court right now. But they need that to happen, and then they need the G5s to fall. Louisiana, nice story. UCF, nice story. Memphis, whatever, fill in the blank. We need them to fall if we're the Big 12. But if those things happen, and none of these things have been crazy that I've suggested yet, if those things were to happen, here's the biggest hurdle they're going to overcome, or have to overcome, and that is memories of week 1. Because Colin's showing you, if you're watching on YouTube, a bunch of still photos of just the debacles that were, multiple debacles in the Big 12 yesterday. The problem is we're coming up very quickly on an endpoint, and that endpoint is you are not going to have any cross-pollination of conferences after that. Everyone's playing inside their bubble. And so what'll happen is you may watch Iowa State in week 4, week 5, week 8, week 9, and you may say, oh, they look a whole lot better. But then someone else is going to look you in the face and say, yeah, but how can you know? Don't confuse parity where a whole lot of teams look competitive. Don't confuse parity with quality. Because it could just be that you're watching a whole lot of bad teams play each other in the Big 12 and you don't know any better because after week 1 and week 2, they haven't ventured out because that's not the way the sport is designed this year and played anyone outside the conference. And if we want to talk about week 1 and week 2, do you remember what happened to Kansas State? Do you remember Iowa State? So that would be the biggest hurdle. That and Texas or Oklahoma State or Oklahoma, 2 of the 3, having good enough resumes, past conference championship Saturday, that is, to get in a playoff. So I'm just saying it's something that I would watch. I know it's fun to laugh at people at their misfortune right now. I wouldn't necessarily laugh too hard at the Big 12. And if the conference is as bad as it looked yesterday, trust me, you'll have plenty more opportunities to laugh before the season's over. Now comes a point that I've been looking forward to. Yesterday, Georgia Tech got a really big win. And we're about to talk about a whole lot of stuff that happened in week 1, as I'm calling it. So let's get started now. I'm going to recap briefly our stance on Georgia Tech. We've called them the biggest sleeping giant program in America, and I want to stress long before anyone outside of that athletic complex did in Atlanta. Long before. So I never viewed it as an if. I only viewed it as a when. To be clear, I'm not telling you it's happened yet, but I have had zero doubt. I remember being down in Columbus. We're about to show you video in just a second from the aforementioned Columbus, Georgia late kick independent days, and I remember when Jeff Collins was hired, he had yet to coach a game. He had yet to organize so much as a practice there. But everything he said perfectly aligned with what I had been screaming Georgia Tech football should embrace as its brand forever. And that's quite simply Atlanta. Georgia Tech didn't matter in its own city. You had the intersection of the SEC and the ACC footprint. You have a city called the capital of college football. You got the Hall of Fame there. Everyone comes there to recruit. And there's a Power 5 program in the middle of downtown Atlanta, and they were totally irrelevant. So Jeff Collins, this guy comes in and slaps 404 all over the place, which is the area code of the place where they're at, being Atlanta, Georgia. And they brand themselves as Atlanta. And you look around and you say, well, any idiot could have done that. Okay, but they didn't. And that's the point. So then the second part was the energy was palpable. All the high school coaches in the state of Georgia started talking about Georgia Tech. This was happening behind the scenes. You would not have picked up on this unless you were really plugged into the high school scene in Georgia. So we were doing Late Kick in Columbus at the time. I was working down at WLTZ NBC 38 in Columbus, Georgia. I was anchoring the news in exchange for being able to use their studio to do this show that ended up being picked up by 24/7, and here I am. But at the time, we were independent, so we were still doing the shows on Sunday night, and I didn't have any Georgia Tech fans watching the show, so I had no incentive to do this, but yet, Colin, get that video ready. I was on there, and I was fielding some hate, some Yellow Jacket hate from my Georgia fans. And I said, you know what? I don't think you guys really understand what could be about to happen here. I don't think anyone understands the immense potential of this program at Georgia Tech. So keep in mind what you saw yesterday. Keep in mind all the positivity on Twitter and social media afterwards and everyone wanting to claim, I called it. This was from May of 2019. Roll it, Colin.
There's a very specific brand and blueprint that Georgia Tech's going to have to use, but they can use it. And they can absolutely find, you don't have to have 100. They can absolutely find 25 per year that are competitive enough that also can get it done in the classroom and want to come to Georgia Tech because it's been rebranded as a place that's a destination rather than some backup option for a kid who, also happens to be smart. That's not what Georgia Tech football is going to be in the future. Now, we're going to bookmark this segment because it's not going to happen this year, but I'm bookmarking this segment. And down the road, when a lot of other people are trying to jump on this bandwagon, we're going to be there, and maybe we'll reach our hand out for you to pull you on board. Maybe we won't. Georgia Tech football, they will be coming, and it will be a brand that's a lot more attractive 2 or 3 years from now than it has been over the last 2, 3, or even 7 years.
Was that shirt red, by the way, Colin? I think it was. Anyway, outside of the shirt color, yeah, that's what we were talking about the moment Jeff Collins walked in the door. So for all the I called it crowd, you may have, but you need to get in line behind us. So having said that, Georgia Tech hasn't arrived. I am certainly not sitting here beating a drum saying, let's put this team in our college football playoff projections. Nothing happened yesterday that reverses the idea that they still have a lot of work to do. They know that. I mean, I talked to some of their coaches after the game last night. They know that. They understand that. But what did yesterday prove? Well, I'll tell you one thing it proved. And if you missed it, they beat Florida State 16-13. More on the game in just a second. But I'll tell you what it does prove. It proves that the rooting system has not only started to take place, you may be seeing, we had a crabapple tree across the street when I was growing up, and early spring, you start to see the first fruit on that crabapple tree. I don't advise you eat them, but if you did, you'd bite into it, and oh man, it'd be really tangy because it'd be really sour, not quite ripe, but there was fruit, which was a sign spring was coming. This right here, this win against Florida State yesterday, think about the circumstances and the win, by the way. I mean, imagine being this coaching staff and getting on that plane last night and flying home knowing as you watch Tallahassee, Florida shrink beneath you, wait a second. We had horrible turnovers in the first half. We missed a couple of field goals and an extra point. Like, we had so much stuff go wrong. We start a true freshman quarterback on the road, and we're shut out in the first half, and we still won? Did that just happen? So you got all the mistakes in the world. You got every reason in the world to lose, but you still win, really just because of fight. And that's what it was. So you look at that, and you got so much stuff you got to clean up. But there's just this little sliver of fruit that you see on the tree. That's the takeaway from yesterday. Not that they've arrived, but the takeaway is there are a lot of really good things to come for this program. And let me tell you something. If you didn't watch Jeff Sims yesterday, he made some terrible decisions. He made some great plays. Jeff Sims being the quarterback there. If you watch the broadcast or if you're a diehard recruiting fan, you know the story. If you don't, let me take about 15 seconds and catch you up. Jeff Sims, quarterback, was committed to Florida State. Mike Norvell comes in. 15 minutes later on the job, Mike Norvell says, we're going to take that offer away. You're back out in the open market. We don't have a place for you here, which is fine. I'm not against that. That's tough, but hey, it's your roster. It's your job. You should be picking the talent that you're going to have on your roster because ultimately you're going to be the one that's fired if they don't play well. Point being, Jeff Sims ends up at Georgia Tech and starts the first game against the Noles. And I am not, as I tweeted last night after the game, I am not one that second guesses a lot of decisions. I'm not the second guess play call crowd or anything like that. And I'm not going to second guess this. Mike Norvell may very well know what he's doing. I will just say that Georgia Tech football has been the beneficiary of one of those decisions. And number two, this guy, Mike Norvell, is going to hear the name Jeff Sims a whole lot, as will you, as will I, over the next few years. Two things in addition that happened yesterday for Georgia Tech. They found a quarterback, and he's got immense upside and immense potential. And number two, he is going to rapidly change perception of Georgia Tech football. Sometimes when you talk about changing and or turning a program around, people make it analogous to like turning the Titanic in a harbor. Sometimes it is. But let me tell you what greatly expedites that process: a dynamic playmaking quarterback. We saw it happen at Clemson. We've seen it happen at a number of places. It seems like, some things are going right, some things are going wrong. When you got that kind of guy, and he's only a true freshman, and that's the face of your program, and that's the guy kids are seeing on Saturdays, it opens floodgates. I think they had completions to 10 different receivers yesterday. It opens floodgates. And the perception now you will see manifest itself on the recruiting trail. You're not going to have to wait to the class of 2022, 2023, and beyond, this upcoming recruiting cycle. You'll see, because there's been this game in the ACC for a while. It's Clemson and who's going to take that number 2 spot and eventually challenge them. And I'm not telling you it's going to happen this year. I am unequivocally telling you I have bought all the stock I can and then some in that program. And I think eventually Georgia Tech will be that team. If no one else wants to do it, or if other teams want to come along with them, they're going to be the constant. They're going to be there. So they will continue to rise. They got a big one this Saturday at home against Central Florida. Central Florida opens as an 8-point favorite. I think that thing is sitting at 7.5 right now. Other week 1 reactions. Some people are calling this week 2. Some people called it week 0 the week before, therefore week 1. Listen, yesterday was Saturday, and the 2 days before that was Thursday, so we had some football there. So let's talk about what we saw. As I said, you guys love the metaphors. What the Unabomber was to the Postal Service, the Sun Belt was to the Big 12, essentially. We already talked about the Big 12 side of this, and I don't normally talk Sun Belt a whole lot on the show because not a ton of you are Sun Belt fans, but let me just tell you this. That Louisiana-Iowa State game, I was texting back and forth with Tim Watts from over at BamaOnline.com today, and I said, Timothy, because he lets me call him by his full name. That's the name his mom gave him. I said, Timothy, if I were to put generic uniforms on those 2 teams yesterday, would you, with your life on the line, have been able to pick out which team was the Power 5 team and which team was the Group of 5 team? And for those of you who were watching, if we take the uniforms away and I just put generic uniforms on everyone, could you pick out the G5 and the Power 5? In fact, you probably would have mislabeled them. You probably would have put the P5 label on Louisiana because they were the better team and they looked like they had the better roster. And a lot of you are probably confused by that because you automatically just think, well, Power 5, there's so many inherent advantages and roster advantages that, by default, that's why they were a 2-touchdown underdog or thereabouts, 11 or 12-point underdog, were the Louisiana Raging Cajuns. There is a very dated mentality, I think, when it comes to roster comparison that still exists today. Still exists. I want you to think along with me. Things have changed. The dynamics have changed. Your eyes weren't deceiving you. I think Louisiana had a better roster. I think they had a better team when they went up there to Iowa State yesterday. And that's crazy because you're thinking, not only is Iowa State a P5, they're a nice solid Power 5. Okay, well, 2 things could be true because that could be true, but Louisiana went up there and spanked them. And Billy Napier's guys looked like they perfectly well knew what they were doing. How does that happen? TV deals is how it happens. New TV deals. This is not 20 years ago. So I want to put you in the mentality and in the mind and in the shoes of, let's say, a 3-star receiver in Alexandria, Virginia. And you're sitting there 20 years ago, and you got offers from Louisiana, and you got offers from Louisiana Tech. And so you want to play big-time football. You want to go to the NFL. You want to play on TV. And then Oklahoma State walks in the door, or Kansas State walks in the door, very last minute, and they offer you. You're taking them. I mean, you're taking the offers. P5 means you are going to be on TV every week. You're going to have great facilities. You're going to get access to scouts. They're going to know who you are. And you just couldn't get that at Louisiana. It is not 2000. It is 2020. Everybody's on TV every week. What inherent advantage, what major edge does me, 3-star receiver from Alexandria, Louisiana, what major edge do I have going 1,000 miles away from home in Manhattan, Kansas? No knock on Kansas State, but what advantage are they giving me that I can't get right here, going right down the road to college? The answer is nothing. I'm going to be on TV. I get to stay close to home so my friends and family can come see me. The scouts know about me. You can't hide anymore is the point. And so 20 years later, with the proliferation of everyone having a TV deal, there is far less incentive for a bunch of these athletes from the South to leave the South. They're not all going to play at Georgia or Florida or Alabama, but they can play at a place like Louisiana, and they can get access to top-level coaching, obviously, because Billy Napier probably going to be at one of those major stops sooner rather than later, and they can get on TV, and they can get access to scouts, and they can go to the league. What more do you need? So a lot of people looked at this, and they were surprised. Arkansas State went to Kansas State. It was kind of the same way. And I'm just telling you, I think you'd be very surprised when you do these roster comparisons. In fact, I pulled up our 24/7 Sports roster comparison that we have right there as a tool on the website. I preach that it's criminally underutilized. Here's how I know. I went there today, and I compared the Kansas State roster to the Arkansas State roster. Which team do you think has more 4- and 5-star talent on the roster? It ain't Kansas State. Did you know that before yesterday? Did you know that 5 minutes ago? Yeah. So things have changed. And I think a lot of maybe a 20 or 30-year-old mindset as it relates to P5 and G5, it still exists. Here's the reality. The gap between the top 5 in the Power 5 and then the next few, but the gap between the top level, the top tier of Power 5 and anyone in the 30 to 40 range of Power 5 is far wider than the gap between the 33rd best Power 5 team in the country and Louisiana and Central Florida, teams like that. That gap has evaporated. The big gap that you think exists is not between Power 5 and G5. The big gap is between the top level of Power 5 and then a couple of rungs down in Power 5. That's where the big gap is. Because if I put Louisiana on the field with Alabama, they're painting the walls with their blood. I put them on the field with Iowa State, competitive, if not the better team, being the G5 team. Now, as for Florida State yesterday, they lost to Georgia Tech. We just talked about that a second ago. And some of you, judging by my inbox and Twitter DMs, were surprised by that. And so I want to ask you a question. One word, 3 letters. Why? Why are you surprised? I guess I can't sit here long. That would be irresponsible. But why are you surprised that this team lost? Is it because of the point spread? Is it because they were nearly a 2-touchdown favorite? Is it because they were at home? They've recruited better? Like the roster comparison tool would tell you that Florida State's the more talented team, which they are. Is that why? Because I want to take you back to March. And the second that we went into quarantine and then spring ball was canceled, I was sitting at this very desk, and unfortunately I didn't have Colin dig through the archives for this today, but I sat at this very desk and I looked you in the eye, as I often do, and I said, there is no major program in America more ill-equipped to handle what's about to happen than Florida State. The reason was very simple. Not only had they brought in an entire new coaching staff, you lose all of spring. They, at the time, were very unsettled at quarterback. They're trying to overturn a cultural problem down there, too. They had some off-the-field ups and downs, and then also what they have to deal with that a lot of other programs don't have to deal with is expectation. Florida State's not a team yet, is what I'm trying to tell you. They're not even a team. They've barely had time to work together. And so they came in yesterday, and they looked terrible, which they should have, and they didn't have the you-know-what together, which I would never have expected them to have, and they lost. And no, it's not fun to watch, but anyone drawing conclusions on Mike Norvell's ability to lead Florida State and talking about how this guy, well, he better get his act together, what are you smoking? Let me give you a little spoiler here. They're about to get some more lumps upside their head over the next few weeks because look at their schedule and look who they have to play. It doesn't get easier. They're going to play probably the meat of their schedule over the next few weeks. They're probably going to lose a few of those games. They are not in a position right now, I don't think, at quarterback to be expected to beat anyone. I don't really like the dynamic any more than being above average that they have at running back. Blocking left a lot to be desired yesterday, you know, the simple concept of blocking. And so Florida State was ill-equipped to deal with the challenge put in front of them. I don't even mean challenges in Georgia Tech. I just mean challenge as in a season. So I don't know why you were surprised by that. So I've let you know what to expect over the next few weeks for Florida State. This is not, to me, an indictment or referendum on Mike Norvell. Like, it may not work out with Mike Norvell, but it will not be because of what just happened yesterday. Notre Dame over Duke 27-13 was a game I had an eye on yesterday. I thought it probably played out about as in tune with what I expected a game to look like as any game yesterday. So Brian Kelly handled this about as I expected. A very low variance approach, as we told you we expected it to be. We expected them to just sledgehammer the bejesus out of Duke, and they did. Kyron Williams goes for over 200 yards in his Irish debut. Really good day on the ground for him. But as sure as I was talking about the inbox feedback about the Florida State game, a bunch of my Notre Dame folks were in my inbox saying, we looked okay, a little lethargic at times, but we just got to get more explosive. You're not getting more explosive? What are you talking about? Ian Book is 37 years old. He's not getting more explosive. What are they going to do, bring in a quarterback coach over the next couple of weeks? They are what they are offensively. So you got one of two ways you can really go and expect Brian Kelly to go. And I'm going to spoil the ending for you on this one as well. I'll tell you exactly the way he's going to go. But you can either try and scrap everything about who you are. Remember 2 weeks ago, they said we got our depth chart set 2 weeks ago. Like there are very few question marks right now on this roster. They know who they are. They know what they're going to do. And so you can either turn all that upside down for the outside shot of putting an offensive, high-risk, high-reward product on the field that could beat Clemson, but also put you at much greater risk of high-variance potential upset losses, or you could just do exactly what they did yesterday. And you can trust your physicality and trust your roster edge, and you're probably going to be favored against every team outside of Clemson that you play, and you can give yourself a puncher's chance against Clemson. If you're Brian Kelly, which formula would you choose? I think a lot of you in the Xbox crowd may choose the former. I'm taking the latter all day long, and he's going to take the latter. They are what they are offensively. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. I don't think that's bad news. They announced that guy had an extension to 2024 yesterday that apparently they decided like half a year ago. They didn't do it because they've been winning 7 games. They've been like a back-to-back-to-back double-digit win program. So, no, they haven't won a national title. But outside of the crowd that's been winning national titles every other year, there aren't too many other programs that are comparable to what Notre Dame's done. They got talent at quarterback coming in. It's just not this year. So he's going to buy his time, play a solid, low-variance brand of football, and they'll give themselves a puncher's chance against Clemson. They won't be favored because they're not as good as Clemson, but they'll be favored in pretty much every other game, and they'll be the better team in pretty much every other game. So he handled it yesterday exactly how I thought he was. Now, North Carolina played Syracuse yesterday, and that score was a little odd. I'll grant you that. When I walked in the office and looked up at the TV, and boy, oh boy, all caps. One of my buddies texted me, North Carolina, period. Defense, period. Spelled it with a C, by the way, shamefully and inexplicably. Okay, well, might I suggest we just pump our brakes just a tad here? Listen, I hope that they're a defensive juggernaut too. Nothing would make me happier than to know that everyone in Chapel Hill was wrong about the concerns about the depth and quality of their defensive line. That would be great. Having said that, Syracuse is bad. That's a bad football team. How bad? They ran 73 plays yesterday and amassed 202 total yards. That's hard to do, guys. That's hard to do if you're trying to suck at offense. That is good for 2.8 yards per play. Again, that is a very, very, very low number. So I'm not taking anything away from North Carolina. It was a very workmanlike performance, and you know I'm on board with North Carolina, especially the future of the program. What I'm saying is a lot more games are lost than they are won in week 1. And this is a telltale example of probably a side of the football that was made to look a whole lot better than they actually are because of just total and complete ineptitude on the side of Syracuse. And I'm not so sure Syracuse doesn't have a whole lot more concerns than just what we saw on the football field yesterday. So point being, we'll find out together, good or bad, over the next few weeks. North Carolina is going to be a very good team this year. I just don't think they're holding everyone to under 2 touchdowns a game. And last but not least, and this kind of leads into a game I'm really looking forward to this week, Louisville beat Western Kentucky. Most of you probably didn't watch that. Miami on Thursday night took care of UAB. Both did what they needed to do. This Miami-Louisville game, I'm not sure where they have it slotted. I think it may be a primetime game this week. This is an important game. It's a really important game for both. Now, here's the question, which I don't think we have answered yet. Like everyone looked at the Big 12 yesterday, and they knew, had Big 12 teams been playing each other yesterday, you know, if Iowa State would have played Kansas State yesterday, by default, one of them would have won. And they'd be the same team, but because one of them would be 1-0, you'd be looking at them saying, some good things to take away yesterday from Iowa State's 17-14 win over Kansas State. But they'd still be the same team that you think's terrible today. You just wouldn't know it. Well, in the ACC, neither of these teams got upset. Louisville didn't get upset by Western Kentucky. Miami didn't get upset by UAB. So now they're going to play each other. One of them's going to win. That's my first bold prediction of the week. One of them is going to win Saturday. One of them's going to be 2-0. How good? Is it a misleading 2-0? I think we'll learn a lot more by actually being able to lay eyeballs on the game, but that's something I'm looking really forward to. That's going to be one of the spotlight games we talk about this week. Best bet for this week, which has nothing to do with the Miami-Louisville game, is coming up. It is an ACC game, though. All right. Really important weekend, not just in the ACC and the Big 12 where they played football, not just in the Big 10 where they had a lot of rumors and whispers about playing football, but in the SEC. They are, as of yesterday, a couple of weeks away from teeing it up themselves, and we have been talking a whole lot, specifically at Georgia and Alabama, about different position battles. Going to start at Georgia. We told you on Thursday, DeJuan Mathis has made this a serious quarterback battle. We not only told you that, after Jamie Newman opted out and it was assumed JT Daniels had that job on lock, not really. We actually thought and still think, coming out of this weekend, DeJuan Mathis is the favorite in the clubhouse to land the starting quarterback job at the University of Georgia. We hinted at that, and I also told you this was an important weekend. Like as big as it was for other reasons in places where they're actually playing football, this was a huge weekend in the SEC and for Georgia because they got to decide on a quarterback. This is not a dynamic where they can afford to take this thing into the season. You got to choose a guy because you're running totally different offensive packages. You're running totally different styles of offense with one versus the other. One's JT Daniels, one of them's DeJuan Mathis. So I'm looking, as the games are going on elsewhere in the country, I'm looking at dogs247.com yesterday afternoon. Jake Rowe and the guys, Kip Adams, Rusty, they always have great intel after scrimmages over there. And sure enough, Kirby Smart, obviously watching late kick when he was preparing for the scrimmage, fashioned that scrimmage where DeJuan Mathis took every first team rep in the entire first half of that scrimmage. That's not an accident. That is that coaching staff sitting around saying, we got to figure out what this dude has. Like, we think that coaching staff thinks he's too good to keep off the field. That was the mentality going into the latter part of last week. They had to find out in that scrimmage. Now, the best intel that I got, the best intel that Jake and the guys had over at Dogs 24/7 was had a good day. There were some positives to take away. There were some negatives to take away. This is not a dude who's going to move it up and down the field on that Georgia defense, nor, for that record, is pretty much anyone else in the country. But now where do we sit? And where we sit is I still think, if I had to bet my money today, DeJuan Mathis is the ultimate starter there. Run blocking well ahead of pass protection is the other very important piece of intel coming from Georgia. And why that's important is because when I marry how that offensive line looks with the two styles of quarterback we have that we could potentially go with here, and I know run blocking's there. Pass pro, it's iffy. And I know outside of George Pickens, I got some talented but question mark types at receiver. And I know I got one of the best defenses in the country. What style of quarterback gives me the best chance to win? I think it's the 6'6" guy who is a serious threat with his legs and who can fall forward and pick me up 3 tough yards when I need it. That's why I think DeJuan Mathis is going to start at quarterback for Georgia. By no means is that settled yet, but that is my feel on that quarterback situation right now. At Alabama, I'm going to be guarded in how I phrase this, but when you've been around a little while and you've talked to people at various programs, you learn which ones to listen to and which ones not to listen to. You all know the type that will tell you, 14 of these freshmen are going to start this year. Everybody looks great. We're going undefeated and could possibly challenge in the AFC West. Well, that's great, and that sounds all well and good, and that plays well on a message board. That's not reality. So you learn at Alabama and everywhere else who to listen to. So let me put it to you like this. The folks I've learned to listen to over the years, the folks who, if anything, err on the side of pessimism over optimism, to a man, they have touted Will Anderson, who is a true freshman outside linebacker, as one of the most impressive players they've ever seen in this program, period. This program being Alabama, the one that wins a national title about every other year on average, the one that's pumped out who knows how many dozens of players to the NFL now, Will Anderson is a guy who rocketed up our 24/7 Sports individual player ratings, and by signing day, he was in the top 10, and, some people cried Bama bump. Conveniently, they don't revisit that allegation after the ones who get the bump and happen to be committed to Alabama end up shining. But I digress, not to defend the Rankings Council. Will Anderson is going to be a stud. Will Anderson is going to play a ton of minutes from day one at Alabama. He was part of an insane edge rusher class that they signed. And you wondered, Drew Sanders, Chris Braswell, Anderson, like which one of those guys is going to be the first to pop? All of them may. I'm telling you, Will Anderson is going to pop and going to be really, really good. Now, outside of that, Nick Saban yesterday used a word, and if you've listened to Nick Saban a while, there are just certain phrases he uses. And when he says his offense was efficient, that means they had a really, really, really good day. He doesn't so much care about the big plays. He cares about efficiency. Because ultimately, when you're as talented as they are, that's going to win 99 times out of 100. So here's what I left getting some intel on Alabama scrimmage thinking. It's all well and good to talk about efficiency, and it's great to have these freshman standouts that are going to be on the field early and often, but then I watched Clemson play. And if Ohio State and the Big 10 get their way, we're going to watch Justin Fields and Ohio State play. And here's what I sit here thinking. I sit here thinking to myself, I know how they're going to start the season. I know Mac Jones is starting there. I think I know he's the best option for them right now. But they also have a guy named Bryce Young, who we know has virtually limitless upside and certainly has the best upside and best physical tools on that roster, any quarterback. That's what we think we know. Number one player in the country was Bryce Young this last recruiting cycle. If the time comes where they end up in a playoff scenario against Clemson, who do we think, rhetorical question here, who do we think at quarterback is best equipped by that point to put them in position to beat Clemson or put them in a position to beat Ohio State? That's the question I wonder about with Alabama. Because with some changes that I'm about to talk about, no elements, Colin, it'll take like a minute. With some changes that I'm about to talk about at A&M, this is the overwhelming favorite in the SEC West right now. To me, there is not a preseason close second to Alabama in the SEC West. So I'm not thinking about SEC West. I'm thinking way down the road, way down the road. So we've got a lot of time to figure that out. What I was talking about with A&M, who I, a few weeks ago, thought was the biggest threat to Alabama in the West, Jamon Osborne is out. He has opted out. That was their best returning receiver. Now, a lot of my Aggie fans will argue, we got some really talented younger options. Yeah, you do. I think Damon Demas is going to end up being better than Osmond would have been this year. Point being, he hadn't played a down in college yet. And so now they're down Baylor Cupp, the big tight end who was returning from injury and now has to go on the shelf again. And now they're down Osmond, and so they've had some opt-outs there. I don't know what A&M is right now. I don't know what LSU is right now. I don't know what Auburn is right now. And while you never technically know who anyone is until they play, and maybe even after they play, I don't think there's a close second to Alabama in the West. As we start the season, I don't think that. So that's what's going on in the SEC right now. All right. We, every week during the regular season, so now, in other words, and in weeks moving forward, we end up giving you 5 plays against the number. Some of you bet these. Some of you are just fascinated in listening to how we arrive at the numbers. I try and tailor it to where it appeals to all of you and not just the hardcore gambling crowd. But since you are there, what we call our 5 plays are the Ramen Noodle Express. And they are intended to keep you from having to live off a diet of ramen noodles. We end up, by our Thursday show, delivering all 5 of them to you. These picks could come at any point. I could give multiple picks out on Sunday. I'm going to give you at least one every Sunday. I could give multiple picks out on Sunday. I could give one on Sunday, 4 of them on Tuesday. I could give the rest of them on Thursday. I could drop 2 of them on the Late Kick Extra podcast for all you know. So, really good incentive if you care about this stuff to watch every show and listen to every podcast. Having said that, this is the first regular week for us of the season. And so tonight, we unveil our first best bet of the season. And since the Ramen Noodle Express is the entire package, what we have decided to call the Sunday pick, the early best bet, is just the seasoning. You know, the little packet that you have in there and you put the flavor on. So the Sunday seasoning special this week, we are headed to Duke. Duke is favored by 6. They're hosting Boston College. And here you see the difference in the Vegas line and our number. This is a noon kickoff. There's some conjecture in the control room in here. Colin says this may be ACC Network. I saw ESPN3. Either way, it's going to be kind of hard to find for you. But as the Vegas number opened today at 5.5 and went up to 6, you see our internal number has this thing well up over a touchdown. We like Duke by double digits. And so our first of 5 plays this week will be the Duke Blue Devils minus 6 points. Expect that one to move up to a touchdown. And that's why we want to move on that one. Now, again, we will have the rest of those no later than Thursday. Could come at any time. To be honest with you, I don't like waiting till Thursday because I like to get moves before those lines adjust. And so stay tuned is all I'm saying to you. We got a lot of folks in the chat right now. Really appreciate you being here. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Click the bell, very important, because it sends you notifications when we go on air and when we post videos. And also subscribe to the Late Kick podcast and leave us a 5-star review. And that's really all we ask. A follow on Twitter would be nice as well, at Late Kick Josh. It's been a great show. It's been a great week. We're just getting started. We will be back here same time Tuesday night. Until then, for Director Colin, for Jordan on the podcast side, I'm Josh Pate. God bless. Have a great start to your week. We will see you Tuesday night.